ego is really important. And this idea that we have from the Eastern philosophies that ego is, you just need to destroy it and ignore it and dissolve it. It's fantasy land. So when you're going through a period of trouble, as we all do at certain times, your very identity, your sense of self has had a big chunk cut out of it. And that hurts. Don't just dismiss that pain as, oh, it's just ego, it doesn't matter. It matters. It's who you are.
Well, welcome.
Thank you, dear.
As you know, I've wanted to talk to you for some time. I really enjoyed your show with Rogan, but back when I heard that, my podcast was different. My podcast was a Bitcoin podcast.
Yeah.
It was the biggest show about Bitcoin. And I was listening to you talk about status and cults, and I was like, am I in a cult? I was questioning myself, am I in a cult? And now we've got a different show. I stopped about 4 months ago doing the Bitcoin thing.
Okay.
We've moved to the UK. We're just talking to interesting people.
Cool.
But I still got some of the same questions.
Yeah.
So just we'll set the scene for people. You're as an author and a journalist, but I feel like you're basically somebody who understands people's brains.
I think that's fair enough. At least I try to, my own brain and other people's brains, and try and understand what makes people tick and work, and what's going on under the hood.
Well, and in the world we're in right now, which seems to be getting more crazy, does that make your work more interesting?
It does. It does make it more interesting. I mean, I think one of the big things is that people always say history repeats itself, and it does. Humans keep on making the same mistakes over and over and over again. And I think a lot of the stuff that I've sort of covered in my work, I think explains why that is.
And that is because we're dumb idiots?
Yes, we're dumb idiots. No, because, ultimately it's because I think the brain is evolved not to be a seeker of truth or a establisher of peace and utopia. The brain is a storyteller. And so the brain tells a story of who we are and a story of the world, and works very hard to reassure us that story is true. So it's much more interested in the story than it is in the truth, than it is in these great sort of lofty ideals about peace and harmony and everybody getting along. And so that's why history repeats itself. That's why human behaviour always is the same generation after generation, no matter how advanced we get. Is that everybody's sort of living out this story.
And so I guess if you understand that, does that mean you can have a better command of yourself?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, one of my favourite sort of quotes is, Carl Jung said about how, it talks about the power of making the unconscious conscious, and that's what I try to do with a lot of the stuff that I write about. Is to say, look, this is what's going on under the hood of your brain. This is what it means to be a story. You're a story. You're living in a story. Donald Trump is a character in a story. AOC is a character. So is Elon Musk. These are all characters in stories. They're villains and heroes. And one of the most important things to understand about stories is the stories are never really true. They're massive simplifications. They're kind of one-eyed. They make heroes of some people and villains of others. They lack nuance. They're biased. So we're living in amongst all this kind of crazy story shit that throws us off all the time and makes us hate people, makes us love people, makes us go on stupid feuds and deludes us into believing things which aren't true.
And I guess with that, therefore, we have our own individual story in this giant macro story.
Yeah.
Or there's different levels of story.
Well, I guess maybe what we want to understand is maybe take it from when we're born. Humans are born with radically unfinished brains compared to any other animal, and that's why we have these extended childhoods. Is because the brain is continuing to form. It doesn't really fully form until we're in our early 20s. And what's happening during those sort of formative years, literally formative years, is our brains are figuring out what is the story world that we've been born into? What is the culture? What is a hero in this place? What is a villain in this place? What goal should we be pursuing? Who should we be trying to be? And we learn that through stories. Through our parents tell us stories. fairy tales, stories about real life, stories about ourselves. You were naughty today, you were good today, and they praise us, reward us with status and love if we do things that are heroic, and punish us by withdrawing status and withdrawing love if we act in a kind of villainous way. So the brain is tuning us into this story world that we're born into. And if you think about it, even in the present day, if you're, a baby being born in Tunbridge Wells will be born into a very different story world to a baby being born in Saudi Arabia or Afghanistan, and they will become a very different kind of person with a very different set of ideals, a different character in a different story world, because their brain has been tuned to live a different life, live a different story.
And so that's unique to humans.
Unique to humans, yeah.
Huh.
And that is the difference between us and the rest of the animals, is that we experience our life as a story, beginning and middle and end. We've got this experience of time. We ruminate about the past. Elephants don't do that. Fish don't ruminate about the past. We imagine the future. We imagine happy endings. We strive for happy endings. So yeah, we're a storytelling animal, and that is our superpower. That is the thing that makes us striving for the future. It makes us, achieving these great goals. But it also is the thing that trips us up and gets us fighting wars and doing genocides. It's good and it's bad.
So is that? I don't know if you would even know this, but is that part of the evolutionary process that, as we became supposedly intelligent, that it required our brains to form in a different way, take time to form?
So the way I kind of pass it is that there's 3 big steps to evolution.
Yep.
So evolution's always trying, of the evolution of life is always trying to solve the problem of how do we overcome the obstacles of survival in order to achieve our goal of survival. So the first way it decided to solve this problem was with kind of reflexive technology. So bacteria, the very earliest forms of life. If you go back to about 3.8 billion years in your family tree, the root of your family tree and my family tree, there's a single cell bacteria. That's the earliest form of life, and that single cell bacteria overcame its obstacles in pursuit of its goals with this kind of reflexive. With reflexes, they're surprisingly smart single cell bacteria. They know what's going on inside their body, such as it is. They know what's going on outside them, and they change their behavior as a result of that. But it's very limited. It's very inflexible. It's algorithmic. So it's if the conditions outside me are X, I'm going to do Y. So very powerful, but limited, and it's limited because that kind of behavior isn't very good for unpredictable environments. Okay. So when the unpredictable happens, it has no other option. It just does A or B or C or D or whatever it is. So the next big thing that evolution invented, such as it does, to overcome obstacles in pursuit of goals, is the feeling system, emotions. So feelings and emotions are much better than reflexes because they don't instruct their owner what to do, they just advise. Okay. So an emotion, a feeling is an advice. So and you can override that advice. So a fish might be simultaneously hungry but also scared because there's a predator near its source of food. So it will override its feeling of hunger and go, actually, I'm going to wait until that arsehole is gone so I can go and get my food. So fantastically successful bit of technology by evolution. Emotions, feelings, and of course the more complex the animal, the more complex the sort of the set of feelings that it has. If anybody that owns a dog knows that dogs have feeling, a retinue of feelings very similar to ours. And then the third one, which is the human one, the only one that we have, is story. So story enables us to swap information about the overcoming of obstacles in pursuit of goals. It enables us to remember our own experiences overcoming obstacles in pursuit of goals. It enables us to imagine a future if we overcome obstacles in pursuit of this particular goal. And perhaps most importantly, it allows us to kind of work together as one sort of great big super organism. So we're a highly cooperative animal, humans. So we share a great vision of what the future looks like. That's what Donald Trump is doing at the moment. In America, has this shared vision. He's telling a story about making America great again. And millions of Americans are, fusing with that story and cooperating with him by voting for him, to enable them to sort of make this happen. So that's why storytelling, that's what story is. Story is this device for fusing human brains together and allowing us to overcome obstacles in pursuit of our goals as this kind of collective super organism.
But does that mean we are susceptible, therefore, to lying to ourselves or manipulating other people?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, yes.
Yeah.
I personally feel like that idea that people consciously manipulate other people to do what they want in this kind of supervillain way is overstated. I don't think it happens anywhere near that much. I think most people...
Subtle.
Well, I don't even think they know that they are manipulating people, but not in an evil villain way. I think most people who believe... I think, Donald Trump sincerely believes what he's saying is true. So does Elon Musk. So does, Kamala Harris or, Keir Starmer. Religious people sincerely believe in their gods. Like they're not manipulating people to join their religion. They really, really believe in the truth of Muhammad or Jesus or whoever it might be. But they're all telling stories. They're all describing a story world, and a part of their description of that story world is who you have to be as a person in order to succeed and be a hero and gain status and be accepted into this story world. And if we accept what they're saying, we start to become that person.
It's interesting because we talk about a lot of times in politics this kind of marketplace of ideas.
Yeah,
but it's really a marketplace of stories.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a philosopher called Dan Williams who's really good on Substack. He's got a great Substack, and he's written a paper where he calls it the marketplace of rationalizations. Is the way he describes it, which I think is really good. And his argument, I think, is that's what you're getting when you're reading newspaper columnists. Like, you have this instinct that the world is a certain way, but you're looking for somebody really smart to tell you a story which rationalizes, the way that you kind of feel that the world actually is. And that's what a lot of these columnists and people on social media are doing, is they're selling their rationalizations, they're selling their stories. And when you read somebody whose story feels right to you, you feel connected to them, you identify with them, you feel really good. That's an ally for you, that's a hero. But when you read somebody who describes the world, tells a story of the world that you don't identify with, that you don't recognize, you have the opposite, where you kind of see them as a villain and you get really angry and emotional.
But you can have a shift. You have a certain view of the world,
yeah,
and then you could have your world changed.
Absolutely, yeah.
What is it? A more convincing story, or?
Well, I think what happens sometimes is that sometimes there can be situations in which you have competing stories in your head.
Yeah.
So I've interviewed a few people. So I've interviewed like a 9/11 conspiracy theorist who had this sort of conversion. And more recently, I interviewed somebody who was an anti-vaxxer who had this kind of conversion. And I mean, the anti-vax was interesting because she got sucked into this when she had her child. She had a home birth, and the woman, what do they call them? The nurse is midwife. That's it. Yeah. So you can tell they're not a parent. The midwife, the midwife was an anti-vaxxer and basically convinced her not to get her baby vaccinated, and she got really sucked into that world, and so that was the story that she started to believe, that and the particular story that she believed was that vaccines were this conspiracy by big pharma to make money and that kind of thing. But she also had a story about the world that she was a skeptic, and the scientific method and science was very, very important to her. And she says that when she was hanging out online with these anti-vax groups, they were sometimes saying things that I can't remember what it was, that vaccines cause people to be gay. When she was like, "But that's not true. That's obviously not true. And why am I believing this person when they say this, but the same person is saying this, and I'm not believing them?" So she ended up kind of thinking her way out of that story, because she had these two sort of conflicting ideas about who she was. She was both an anti-vaxxer, but also somebody that prided herself on being very rational and skeptical and evidence-based. So I know it's controversial to a lot of people, because a lot of people do think that there's a variety of different arguments about vaccines, and I'm not here to argue for one or the other. But that was her story, and it's just an example of how somebody can have two different kind of warring stories in their head, and that's how it can flip.
Yeah, and I guess the status of the midwife, being somebody who is a midwife, adds some kind of credibility to the story she's telling about being anti-vax.
Absolutely. So this woman was 18 years old. So she was young, and all her friends were at college, and so she felt very sort of isolated. And this midwife came along, experienced, she had I think 8 or 9 kids herself, so she really looked up to her. But more importantly, what happened when she went online and started Googling why not vaccinate? I think she Googled literally why not vaccinate, which is maybe the first thing she did wrong. And so she was immediately going into these online groups, specifically on Facebook. And I think the group was called Great Moms Questioning Vaccines. And so again, she said, I was surrounded by these mums who I really looked up to and really respected. She said, I was brought up in a family of sisters, and I love strong women. I admire strong women. So they were immediately high status to me, and I really wanted to be part of them. And when they embraced me, I felt great. I felt connected, and I couldn't wait to get back online and talking to them. And then what was interesting was that and this is what I argue in the status game, that when you sort of enter one of these story worlds, it's not enough just to believe the thing. So you can become a Christian by believing in Jesus, that he died and rose after 3 days. That's enough to, if you believe that, you're a Christian, welcome to our club. But to actually earn status in that status game of Christianity or anti-vax, you've actually got to practice what I call active belief. You've actually got to absorb that belief and begin practicing it in a practical way. So as a Christian, you have to go to church. You have to maybe not eat fish on a Friday and do all those weird things that Christians do. But for her, she started living the life, and she said she would argue with her doctor about the vaccines, and then she would run back and go onto Facebook and tell all the Facebook mums, I had this argument with my cousin today or the doctor, and they'd all applaud her. And she said, the more you did that kind of thing, the higher you'd raise in status. So it becomes this status game. So in order to gain entry to one of these kind of story worlds, as I say, you've just got to believe what they believe. It's that simple. But to earn status, you've actually got to allow that belief to become an active part of your identity, an active part of your daily life.
See, this is why I wanted to talk to you back when I was running the Bitcoin podcast, because the world of Bitcoin is very weird.
Yeah.
I don't talk about it much on the news show now because you moved away from it, and I don't know what you know, but the general core belief is government having control of money is bad.
Yeah.
They print money, they create inflation.
Yeah.
They surveil you. They get through the banks, get control over who you can send money to. There's this amazing form of money called Bitcoin where anyone can send to anyone. It's decentralized. It separates money and state and can't be debased. And so I ended up setting up a podcast in there, and I ran it for nearly 8 years. And when I was listening to your interview with Joe, I kept hearing points that kind of resonated with me. One, observations of the community, but also observations of myself. And one thing that really stood out is in this world, there are very hardcore Bitcoin advocates. Some people who hate all government. They are anarcho-capitalists.
Yeah.
They want the complete destruction of the state. They want no authority over themselves, and any form of belief in the state, you're basically a cuck. And any opinions that are political, they hate. And so what I notice happening is, I'm not that. I'm a realist. I think a government's a natural monopoly, and I'm empathetic to people on the left. I'm a bit conservative myself, prefer a small government. But when I would challenge some of the orthodoxy that exists, the attacks are quite brutal, quite savage. And what I noticed, there's almost like little gangs that get together that start repeating the same things. And so when I was listening to your interview, I was like, oh, I understand what's happening now. This is a status game.
Yeah.
If I repeat what this person says, they may follow me. I may follow them.
Yeah.
My following increases. My tweets get a broader reach, and I suddenly earn status.
Yeah.
Within this group. And so then I was like, well, this is wild, because I think some people are parroting things to earn status. And I was like, are they doing it to earn status, or have they convinced themselves? And that's where I've got lost.
Right. Yeah, they've convinced themselves, but it's both, really. I mean, because our pursuit of status is largely unconscious.
Okay.
So in the status game, one of the most interesting things that I read when I was doing my research was this guy in the 70s, this anthropologist who had this question about why in parts of Africa there used to be this kind of aristocracy, this royalty, and then the Islamists came in and just destroyed the aristocracy. I don't know, burnt the palaces, took all their worldly goods and took over essentially. And in this part of Africa, Islam was really successful. So he was like, this doesn't make any sense because Islam has been their worst enemy, and yet it's successful. So he went out there and he met some former members of the aristocracy or the royalty, one of whom had embraced Islam and one of whom hadn't. And so the one who hadn't was a peanut seller, and he was miserable and bitter and poor and, remorseless is going over what he'd lost, and just a failure of a human being. Whereas the other person, the person who had embraced Islam, was proud and was wealthy and had status in his community. So his conclusion was that he called Islam your what was the phrase? It's your capacity for claiming status. So they would do things like, one of the things they would talk about, he was very proud of, was there's a thing in Islam where you learn the Quran, you learn it off by heart, and when you've done this, you get this. It's an amazing achievement, and you go to the next level in the game of Islam when you've done this. And
sounds like Scientology.
Yeah, exactly. What it is, it's the same. And so that's it. Your criteria for claiming status. That was the phrase. So Islam was his criteria for claiming status, and so he had that, but the peanut seller didn't. The peanut seller was just a peanut seller. It was embarrassed he was a peanut seller, and because he was just a peanut seller, he couldn't get more than one wife or whatever it was. So that was a big influence with that idea that beliefs, our beliefs are our criteria for claiming status. So if you can accept that, then you can understand then why, when you're going in there and challenging some of these true believers, their beliefs, you're not really challenging their beliefs. You're challenging their claim to status. And so that's why the pushback in these environments is so fierce, because you're not just saying, I think you've made a bit of a mistake about this. You're attacking their very identity. You're attacking their claim to status, and status is immeasurably valuable to human beings. It's the ultimate resource in a way. Since before we're animals, the more status we've earned in life, the better everything has become for us. The greater access to choice of mates, the more food resources we get, the safer our sleeping sites. So survival and reproduction itself is completely rooted in how much status we have. So when you attack somebody's belief as a human being, when you attack their story of the world, you're attacking their claim to status, and that's why you get such a vicious pushback in all of these, whether it's Bitcoin or Anti-Vax or Christianity or whatever it is, it's the same response, because you're attacking their claim to status.
Is it both defensive and offensive? So if I was making a claim, like if I said, yeah, I just think it's a bit naive not to expect government, and maybe we should have some empathy towards people who have lost their job, and I don't know, we should have a tax that gives a certain amount of welfare. So fuck you government cuck. That can be a defense, but can it also be offensive in that people want to go out there and then challenge my statements to try and gain more status?
Absolutely, that's absolutely right. I mean, and you can see you can see that most clearly in acts of actual physical violence. I mean, this is an act of kind of intellectual violence, or narrative violence, but like, in acts of physical violence, so the vast majority of acts of physical violence between humans, especially younger humans, are when their status is challenged. Whether so domestic violence is often rooted in that. Certainly, most violence between young men is often disrespect, or if you're in a gang, a status-based gang war, something like that.
Little sports.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so what researchers into violence, one of them that I read pointed out, which I thought was brilliant, was that if you're a guy that feels that has been threatened or bullied or punched by another guy, they've taken away your status, especially if it's done publicly, by responding to them with violence, or even if you feel disrespected by them, by responding to them with violence. You don't just restore yourself to the level you're at before, you actually gain status. So that's why it becomes such a tempting thing for the subconscious mind to respond with aggression, because you've been pushed back by somebody aggressing you, and if you fight back with greater violence, with greater aggression, you don't just restore yourself to your original state of status, you end up higher up, because people go, wow, that's amazing. So that's true for physical violence, but it's also true for, what you might want to call intellectual violence. So that's why these forums and Reddit forums can get so fruity, because everyone's playing status games.
The humble bee, a keystone species crucial to the survival of Earth's inhabitants. Here's how things would look if bees vanished. And here's how they'd look if humans vanished. But imagine if instead we became a keystone species by doing things the right way, by taking responsibility for our actions and becoming the solution. Iron mines the world's most responsible currency the right way. Because the future depends on it.
Is there a gender difference here? Are men seeking status more than women? Or do they seek it differently?
That's sometimes argued. I think they seek it differently. I think men and women in general play status games in a different way. And one of the ways you can see this most clearly is in young people, boys and girls, at school. And so boys and girls have different violence styles.
Yeah.
Different styles of aggression. Men are face-to-face, out in the open, often violent, whereas female aggression is much more reputation based. It's about, and it's much more collective. So female aggression styles is about bullying, is about ganging up, reputation destruction, talking behind your back, spreading gossip and rumors. Men are much more face to face, one on one. So that one study found that kind of reputation based aggression is twice as common in girls than it is in boys. So it's not to say that boys don't do that stuff, because we do that stuff, but it's much more common in women. And I think you can see that you can.
We just know that innately.
Yeah, you know that innately, but also when you think about the cancel culture world, the online, cancel culture, online mobbing is a very female style of aggression, and I think that's why so many people who you might recognise as woke. It tends female,
It's so fascinating. Is there other aspects of the biology that lead men to be more? Is it the status desire that drives the status games, but the biology that drives the response?
Well, it's the biology. I mean, you can see that men are built for physical violence. We have bigger shoulders. We have more muscles. We're built for physical violence, and we've been more, so it makes sense that we've got the psychology to run that physicality. Men have been fighting fist to fist against this before we were human. So it's deeply ingrained in who we are, and it's not going anywhere. Male violence, because it's been part of us for millions of years.
So technology must have really changed this then, because social media itself there's status in society.
Yeah.
Status in your family, status in your friendship groups, there's status in your town, your country, but there's a whole different world of status online. And so has social media has that really just put a lens on this?
Well, again, if you zoom right out.
Yeah.
So before humans were living in groups, we were much, much more violent. We would play physical, like dominance-based status games, and we were in our bones were thicker. We were built for men. Anyway, we're built for physical violence, and then we started living in groups around the campfire. And so if you're living in groups around the campfire, you can't play your status games physically, because everyone just ends up, it's a horrendous world. We just end up fighting each other. It's a nightmare. And so we entered this phase that psychologists call self-domestication. We domesticated ourselves. We became more peaceful. So in the grand arc of humanity, we have become much, much less violent. Our bones have become weaker. So we are becoming less and less violent. The more domesticated we become, the more civilized we become, the less violent we become. So that's the good news. So that's what's going on in the sort of big macro scales. Is that for hundreds of thousands of years we were becoming less and less and less violent. But as I say, it's still sort of deeply embedded in this. Of course, one of the main things about social media and online is that you can't be physically violent. But also I do think you could argue it's a product of the kind of post-feminist age. We like feminism has been around for over 100 years now. It's been an incredibly successful ideology, and we are becoming more feminized as a society. And I think the advent of social media has seen an acceleration in the feminization of our culture. Men aren't celebrated that much these days.
I feel like there's been push. I feel like there's like a counterculture pushback on this at the moment.
There is, yeah,
but probably establishing some kind of new status or a different status.
Yeah, there's always going to be this push and pull.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm old enough to remember the 80s, which was this PC era, and then the 90s, the men's mag era, which I was part of. I used to work for Loaded magazine.
Did you?
Yeah, I did. That was my first job. So I was very much part of that pushback, and I suspect that we're going through a similar cycle now, where woke was the 80s PC wars reduxed, and then we're probably going. I don't know if the tech bro era is going to be the new Loaded era. I don't know how it's going to go.
It's the Trump era, I think.
Yeah, but you're going to there's going to be this dialectic, if that's too much of a poncy word. This this conversation back and forth that we're seeing. So it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see how things go. I certainly hope there's space for a kind of a pro men argument that isn't Andrew Tate and that kind of thing.
Yeah. He attacked me on Twitter the other day. First time ever. Yeah, I just came out of nowhere.
Well, that's a state. I would take that as a status, high status thing.
High status compliment.
Yeah.
I announced I'm changing the name of the podcast, and he went crazy.
Right.
I was like, what? I'm with you. I can see his appeal to maybe 14-year-olds for a moment, but I find it a bit weird when grown men, in their late 20s, 30s, certainly 40s, because that's where I am, see that as a role model.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, I'm missing something. And it throws a bit back to you. It's like, is this a curse for you? Are you just seeing the world through status now? Every time you see something, you see status. You see status games.
And I don't think it's a curse. I think it's kind of liberating, really.
Oh, really?
It helps you understand people a lot better. And it also helps you understand yourself a lot better. Because understanding this stuff doesn't make you immune to it. I'm still as interested in my own status as I ever have been. But it enables you to take it a bit less seriously, especially the stuff that doesn't really matter. You might have a bad day because of some slight on social media, and you just know it's just that subconscious thing.
That's how my day started.
Really?
I got up this morning, me and Connor were driving down. I was like, some dicks have been dicks to me on Twitter. Connor's very, very, he's very cool about this stuff, very observant. And I was sat there waiting for his response, and he said, "You're just winning, Dad."
Yeah.
It was an interesting moment. Okay, so in understanding this, so have you found yourself having more personal control of you? Like, are you, rather than being a subconscious act now, are you recognizing this and go, hold on?
Yeah, that's true, and it's also changed me in other ways. So I think one of the things that I kind of figured out when I was writing the status game was that, because the status game is about status, but connection is also equally important. I just don't write about it because the book isn't about that. But as a tribal species, as a highly cooperative ape, we seek connection and status, I'd say roughly equally. So we want to be connected into groups. We want to feel like we belong. We want to feel loved by our family and our friends and our partners. But we also want to feel valued, and that's the status part of it. And I think that, like all of these things, everybody's wired a bit differently. We all have different needs for connection and status, and I think it's helped me understand that I have a relatively low need for connection. I don't have that many friends that I hang out with very much, and a relatively high need for status, which makes me a bit annoying, a bit ambitious and a bit, all that stuff. So that's helped me understand myself a bit better, and then it helped me realize that I need to prioritize connection more than I have been, because I'm probably dialed in a bit wrong. The other thing is that, I argue in the status game that there are basically three main kinds of status game that we play. There's dominance games, which is about physical violence, social violence, intellectual violence, all those different kinds of aggression, pushing people around, threatening people, reputationally and physically. There's
on that. Sorry.
Yeah.
So, is that used to earn status, or is that used once you've earned status? You realize you can push people around. Is it you probably both?
You use it to force people to attend to you in status.
Okay.
Yeah. So like a gangster might, or an army might. So you're not really, you're earning it. You're forcing people to attend to you as a higher status person, so it's like a power thing, really. Yeah. And then there's the two other forms of status, which are not uniquely human, but we just do it a lot more than any other animal, which is the virtue-based status. So we have, we develop a reputation for being good, morally good. which sounds good, but it's really about knowing the rules and following the rules and policing the rules. So the Gestapo were doing virtue status, so it's only good in that kind of local sense.
But that sounds to me very much where wokeism kind of came from?
Yeah. It is. It's virtue-based status. Yeah, but it's also it's all virtue dominance. You know, so it's a kind of a blend of like the worst status games are virtue dominance games. Like Nazism was a virtue dominance game, communism was a virtue dominance game, wokeism is a virtue dominance game. It's this horrible mix of I know what is virtuous, and I'm going to force you to agree with me. And if you do anything or believe anything or say anything that is against my code of what is virtuous, I'm going to fuck you up. That's a virtue. That's a virtue dominance game. So you kind of it's kind of the worst. It's kind of the worst of human behavior. It's like if the church had an army and was forcing everybody to be Christian, like that. That's and that's certainly what wokeism is. Stroke was. And yeah, so that's the worst of it. And the third kind of game, which I think is the best kind of game, is the success game.
The meritocracy.
It's the success game. So the competence. So we earn status by becoming really good at something. So back in the days of the tribe, we would have been a great honey finder, a great storyteller, a great hunter, a great sorcerer, whatever it might be. And so you offer value to the human family, to the group, by being really great at something. And you know, one of the sort of big revelations for me writing the status game was that you just automatically assume that people who are kind of these great virtue celebrities, whether it's the Pope or the Dalai Lama or Michelle Obama or Greta Thunberg, wherever it is, they're the ones that are changing the world. They're amazing. They're the most amazing people, but they're not. Like for me, it really was a complete sort of turnaround, because it's actually the people playing success games that are changing the world. Like the person who invented the vaccine for polio has done more for the world than all of the popes put together, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
And that's just true. You know, the person who invented the electric car, the person, you know, the people who are really changing the world, who are really saving lives, who are really saving the world from a climate catastrophe in the future is not Greta Thunberg, is the people doing the inventions, is the people advancing the science. The people playing the success games are the ones that really change the world. And success games it's the hardest way to earn status, because you've actually got to become good at something. Virtue-based status is intoxicating because it's easy. All you've got to do is go on Twitter and have a pop at one of your ideological enemies in front of your group, and you've earned a bit of virtue status. So it's very intoxicating, very easy to. It's much easier to be Greta Thunberg than it is to be somebody who's actually doing the hard yards of inventing the thing that's going to reduce the carbons in the system.
And possibly, therefore, why social media has become so toxic, in that I guess there's a limited number of people who can earn real status through success. It's hard.
Yeah.
You know, you've got to be not saying you have to win a category somewhere, but you have to be a leader in a certain area. And if you're incapable of doing that, perhaps there is some envy at other status in society. So you go out and you play the virtue status game in social media and just attack
them. Yeah, try and tear them down. I mean, and I think that's one of the most powerful criticisms of that kind of woke mindset is it's mostly destructive. It's mostly going out to people who've already achieved things and telling you why it's wrong and telling you why it's bad and dangerous and trying to tear it down. It's not very constructive. There's not really much activity based on trying to actually build a better future. It's mostly backwards looking and attacking people who are already successful, as far as I can see.
So what's going on with DEI? I'm not asking you to argue for or against it, but it sounds to me in the world of DEI, people are earning status by giving status away in a non-meritocratic way.
Yeah,
it's like a weird. It's funny now you've talked. I'm like thinking about everything in terms of status. I'm going to be walking home or driving home with Connor, and it's all that's going to consume me. But it's like looking through the Matrix all of a sudden.
Yeah,
but it feels like that is people earning status by giving status away.
Yeah, by rearranging the status game in a way that's not meritocratic.
Yeah,
absolutely. And their argument is that the status game is already broken and unfair, so we're gonna rebuild it in a fairer way. But I'm very much a man of my generation. I'm Generation X. We were brought up to think that the best thing to do.
70s.
80, not that old, just about 80s, 90s, really. Yeah, I'm just about 50.
Yeah, I'm born in the 70s, though.
Oh, yeah, born in the 70s.
I'm born
Sorry,
in the
I thought you meant, yeah.
Yeah, no, I was born in the 70s.
Oh, right, good, good, brothers. Yeah. So so in our era, we had this idea, which I still passionately believe is true, which is the way to build a fairer future, is to stop thinking about race and gender and sexuality when we're playing our status games as much as we can, to make that stuff irrelevant, and to make you're never going to have a perfect meritocracy, because people are always going to be xenophobic, and people are always going to be attracted to people like us. So it's that's just human nature. So you do need to guard against that stuff. There does need to be regulations that try and prevent as far as possible that stuff, and ideas like blind auditioning, that all, as much as you can. But the ultimate goal, I still believe, should be colorblind, gender blind. That stuff should be irrelevant. It's how good are you, how competent are you, and how virtuous are you, or whatever game you're trying to play. That's the way to build a better future, I think.
Very important that you don't lose this, okay? This is your inheritance through Bitcoin.
Let Bitcoin rip. Don't rip up your Bitcoin. Set up inheritance with Casa.
Yeah, I wonder if it's now going to affect the way I parent. I'm trying to think on the hop here, but I wonder, because I often think about how we raise children now, and the things we teach them, and it's a very different world from when we grew up. There was no internet when I was in the early 80s, for sure. Like you, I was on my BMX, and and now it's almost like we thrust kids into the world of status very early with social media, because not only do they have the playground status, they have the online status. Before they were competing, we're competing in a playground, 100 other kids.
Yep.
They're competing on Instagram with the most incredible kids from around the world who've done the most amazing things. And so it makes me realize, like, perhaps why we've seen such a plague of mental health issues in kids and self-harm with girls.
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that. It's very controversial amongst psychologists. They fight like tooth and nail. There's one side that believes that social media is harmful, another side that
I think Jonathan Haidt statistically proved it, though, didn't he?
Well, he says so, but there are lots of other good academics. Right? This is why I'm a huge fan of Jonathan Haidt. I'm a bit of a fanboy of him. But there are lots of other researchers that I really respect who argue passionately that it's not true. But I think that the thing the argument is missing is the personality thing. I think if you're a naturally extroverted person who's kind of quite resilient, social media can be an amazing playground, and if you get attacked, it just bounces off you. But if you're high in neuroticism, like I am, temperamentally, social media can be very harmful, especially if you're a young person, because as an adolescent, your identity is still forming, and we find out who we are by looking out into the world and seeing how people treat us, and if we're more sensitive and more neurotic, and we see people treating, we will see how people treat us, but also see what levels, what the levels are set for normal. So what's a normally attractive person, and if you're looking into Instagram and seeing all these beautiful filtered people and thinking, well, that's normal, I must be really hideous, that's going to affect your self-esteem. That's going to affect how healthy you are psychologically. Yeah,
it's interesting. So I think about this is one of these episodes where you really think in the moment about your own life, but I think about, for example, the podcast. And so when I stopped the Bitcoin podcast, it did really well for me. It's not in the grand scheme podcast that big, but in the Bitcoin world it was. Obviously, status came with that. I could get pretty much any interview I wanted in that world. And when I made the decision to wanted to stop traveling and do the news show struggled for the first couple of months. It really dropped off. And I spent a bit of time just feeling a bit kind of like I was lonely, lost my place in the world. And I thought a lot about sportsmen and actors, people who've had careers and lost them. Like maybe you're a boxer, you've got in the ring 40 times and you've lived that amazing experience, and then it ends and you hear about them having trouble with drink and drugs, and that kind of loss of status, you really internalize it.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the way I think about it is that, because we are this storytelling animal, we live in two worlds at once, human beings. We live on one level in the same world as every other living animal, which is the world of survival. So we want food, water, shelter, procreation. We want those things, and that's what we want. But actually, humans spend most of their conscious time as assuming that they're in a place of relative safety. They're not in a war zone or in a famine zone, or they're not sort of homeless in Mumbai or something. We spend most of our times in the story world. So it's not really the physical world. It's this story world. It's this narrative we're in. So we're this character in this story world. And the way that the subconscious brain measures how well our character in the story world is doing is by its connection and status, how loved and valued we are. So that's why they're so unbelievably important. So, if we get a sense that we're not loved by somebody close to us, by a friend, by a partner, by a family member, it's like it's a wound. It's a significant wound in our identity, in our character in the story world. The same with status. If like you had an experience where you've had a sudden drop off in status, it's a serious thing. Your very identity, your sense of self, has had a big chunk cut out of it, and that hurts. I mean, I had a conversation over Christmas with a writer friend of mine who's sort of going through some, difficult times, and he's sort of vaguely interested in the kind of Eastern philosophies, and he kept saying to me, even though he's read the Status Game, he kept saying to me, "I know it's just ego. I know it's just ego," and I said to him, "There is no just ego." Ego's really important. And this idea that we have from the Eastern philosophies that ego is, you just need to destroy it and ignore it and dissolve it. It's fantasy land.
Okay.
You can't do it. By all means, work hard at trying to care less about that stuff. I'm not saying that's not healthy, because it is healthy. But don't just dismiss it, like by saying, it's just ego. It's who you are, your status, the value you're offering to the world, the achievements that you have in the world. That's who you are. That's your identity. So when you're going through a period of trouble, as we all do at certain times, when your writing isn't going well, your podcast has dropped down, or I don't know, you're a teacher at school and the grades of your class are less good this year than they were last year. Don't just dismiss that pain as, it's just ego, it doesn't matter. It matters. It's who you are. Like, care about it, value it.
But it's almost like you want to be cool enough to not care.
Yeah.
I'm so cool that I don't care. And there are people who have status for being that cool.
Yeah. But then you're saying they have status, so it's kind of paradoxical, because if they have status, they can't be losing that much status.
No, true. But I wanted, because I was like, even talking about this, you're like, part of you is like, well, will people be in the comments saying, "You egotistical prick, what are you doing?" But it was a real lived experience, and it felt bruising, and for me, it was like, well, what does this mean for my life now? This new show doesn't work. No one listens to it. I'm essentially no longer a podcaster. That part of my life is gone. I don't know what the new part is. Am I just going for walks and tending to the garden, and no one's going to give a fuck about me?
Yeah.
And that's weird. But I also know some people want to escape status.
Yeah, but I think that's part of the problem, isn't it? Like, we do have this suicide problem, especially with middle-aged men. Middle-aged men are the most vulnerable group to suicide in Britain, in America. And I think that's part of it. When you're a man, your roles in life, my job, my your kind of labels. How good am I at my job? How good am I as a father? How good am I as a provider and a protector? They're really important to men. And in middle age, you run up against those limits. You start to lose your looks. You start to put on a bit of weight.
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. It's not nice. It's horrible. Perhaps you hit your limit at work. You stop getting promoted all of a sudden, and you realise, I've been doing this same job for 8 years now, and I'm a bit stuck. And your wife is now sick of you, and you don't feel sexy anymore, or whatever it is. All these things happen to middle-aged men, and I think part of the problem is we have this narrative of, it's just ego, it doesn't matter. It does matter, and I think that's that it's bad for us, especially as men who are so vulnerable to suicidal ideation, to dismiss that pain, that very real pain and that significant pain, as it shouldn't matter. You're just an egotist. don't be so silly. I think that's part of the problem.
You've got quite animated talking about this part.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting. Is that because in going through this and learning about it, you've learned of the kind of real detrimental consequences of people's lives? Like, this feels like passion.
Yeah, it is, and it's partly because I'm a Samaritan, so I volunteer with the Samaritans, so I speak a lot to suicidal people on a weekly basis. Yeah, and you know, I've spoken a lot to men who are talking about that.
Yeah.
So you know, and I've been through it myself. Like, you know, like not for a while, but I've been suicidal. I think twice in my life. I've been seriously considering ending it all. And one of those was, you know, periods was certainly about status. You know, I moved back from Australia and I was basically unemployed, and you know, I was worried. Yeah, you know, so yeah, I am passionate about it, and I think I'm pretty passionate about it because I think people just don't understand it. Like this response of my best friend saying, "I know it's just ego." It was like, no, you know, and that's the default response. And you were saying in the comments, "Oh, he's just egotistical." It's, you know, it's pathetic. It's ridiculous. That's the problem. Is that we see status as this negative thing. If you're pursuing status, you're an idiot. You're a show off. You're shallow. It's just not true. You know, the definition of status really is the feeling that you're offering value to somebody else. That's all it is. It's not saying that you want to be Kanye West or a Kardashian or on Love Island or whatever it might be, or rich. It's not what status is. Status is that feeling of I'm valuable. It's not just that I'm loved, I'm valuable to other people. And that's really important that we feel that. And when we suddenly stop feeling like that, like in middle age, it's a serious issue. And just to dismiss that as, oh, it's just ego, it's a big mistake.
Yeah, I've been through a very serious period of mental health issues,
right.
Anxiety, panic attacks, inability to sleep, depression. It was all on a relationship. I had a relationship breakup and I didn't want it to break up.
Right. And
so there's a loss there.
Yeah.
And the loss was, you know, I think about it now with this lens, I'm like, well, it was a bruised ego. I lost status because I wasn't important enough for that person anymore. They didn't want to be in a life with me. And it left a real hole for a long time. But I would never have thought of it as a status thing.
Well, it's connection and status. Yeah. It's a double hit.
Oh, yes.
You know, it's a double hit. So and that's heartbreak. That's all, you know, so yeah, I mean, so that's what's going on there. You know, you're as I said, you know, your identity in the story world is the health of it is based on those two factors. How connected am I? How much status do I have? Like, you know, one of the things that's changed for me is that when I'm feeling depressed and I'm feeling down, I judge it on those three things. Survival is, how's my health? How's my connection? How's my status? And if I'm feeling a bit down, usually there's one of those things. Like I've had a bad status day, like I've had some knockback at work, or I've had a shit review, or whatever it might be, you know. Or it could be connection. I could have an argument with my wife, or you know, or something like that. Or it could be some other thing. I could be worried about, you know, my prostate or whatever it is. But when I'm feeling really bad, there's often two of those realms of suffering, connection and status. When I'm feeling really, really bad, it's three, you know, and I find that on the phones of the Samaritans, actually, the vast majority of the people that I speak to who are suicidal are chronically suffering from a lack of connection and status. So what you hear over and over again is, oh, no one loves me, and I've got no one talks to me, and also I'm useless, I'm worthless, I'm pointless, you know. So it's that double hit, and on top of that, it's a feeling of stuckness. That's the other essential thing. I think that's when it gets really dangerous is when people are chronically lacking in connection and status, and they also feel that it's irreversible. There's nothing they can do to get out of this. That's when it gets really dangerous.
God.
Sorry, it's gone.
No, but it's and it should.
Yeah,
and it's fascinating. I mean, you know, I didn't expect it to go over here, but I can look back at so many parts of my life and think, oh, I understand that better. It's like a better lens for looking through it. Are there dangers of too much status?
Yeah, it's hugely dangerous. We're not built for massive amounts of status. We're certainly not built for celebrity.
Right.
We grew up in tribes, and people often talk about the human tribal size of being about 150. It's known as Dunbar's number, but 150 is the size of the wider tribe, the great scattered tribe around our territory. We'd have actually spent our daily life with around between 30 and 50 people. That was the ordinary size of the daily human group in the long period in which we were evolving. So our brains are still We haven't evolved that quickly. Our brains are still tuned for life in the tribe of 30 to 50 people. So that was the size of our status game. It would have actually been smaller than that because historically men compete with men, women compete with women, and there's also age gaps. So you're competing with people who are roughly the same age as you. Like a 14-year-old in a tribe wouldn't be competing with a 42-year-old. Probably, so we've evolved to play very small, very local status games. We haven't evolved to play these enormous, massive. He talks about social media before competing with people, the most beautiful people in the world. Well, that's what we're doing, and that's why it's stressful. I think of it as identity stress, and we have this incredible stresses on our identity. We want connection and status, but we're playing these enormous status games these days that we're just not equipped to play. And so, just to your question about very high status, we certainly haven't evolved to have that kind of level of status where we're world famous and everybody's fawning around us. And I think that's why people go a bit mad when they become famous. They go a bit crazy. I mean, if you've ever been around super famous people, they're all a bit mad. They're all a bit nuts, and they mostly tend to start believing their own bullshit. They generally start to believe that they are amazing, exceptional, wonderful human beings, and that gives them permission to behave how they want to behave. I mean, it's very, very seductive, all that stuff. And I think sudden status at a young age is the most kind of dangerous kind of status to have, because our brains are still forming. We're still trying to work out who we are, and to suddenly become world famous at 18 or 21, I think is.
Well, you look at Britney Spears right now.
Yeah.
When I remember her coming out. I remember the song.
Yeah.
Beautiful, seemed very cool.
Yep.
I doubt she would have been dating Justin Timberlake if she'd been acting crazy. But you see her now, and there's this fundamental shift in her.
Yeah.
Where she seems a different person.
Yeah.
It's almost like she's both physically and mentally changed from that experience.
Yeah, I don't doubt it. I mean, as I say, I think it's we just haven't evolved to be famous, and I think it's like even leadership. Like one of the things that surprised me doing the research for the status game was the finding that in the tribes in which we evolved, it wasn't normal to have this kind of big man leader who would issue instructions to people. That's not how it was in most human groups. It was leadership by consensus. So if the challenge for the group was, right, we've got to go and hunt down the antelope, then the best antelope hunter would rise up in status suddenly and would be of influence, and people would listen to that person and follow the person's orders, allow them to be of influence. But then they go away again, and they wouldn't be the lead. So and then if it was about building shelter, then the person who was best at building shelter wouldn't. So it was this kind of leadership by consensus, much more, and it was kind of temporary leadership. So it's a much more healthy way of leading in a way. And it is only when we sort of settle down and start to have private property and private land. So leadership could be kind of ring fenced. I own this land, and it's more land than you. Therefore, I'm higher status than you, and that's that. And that becomes a story. So, what happens when people have more land and more riches than somebody else? Is they tell themselves a story that they deserve it.
Right.
That we're a higher caste, a better family. I'm a better person than you, and that's where the story sort of kicks in, and we believe our own stories, and that's where you start getting caste systems and religions and all that kind of hierarchy that we still have today.
Well, it's that kind of question. Then it takes you to the what is enough. These business people who work forever and ever and ever. I was out in America recently with a friend of mine. We were off to a wedding, and this guy's successful, and he was saying, yeah, when do you know you've got enough? When you've made enough? And I was like, actually, I think I'm there.
Yeah.
Because that's why I stopped the podcast. I think I'm there. I mean, I'd like a lot more money. I'd love to have a jet and a yacht, but do you know what? I've got enough to quit I'm going to go back and do this in England. I'm sure we wouldn't talk money. I'm sure he's far more wealthy than I am, and he said, no, I've got nowhere near enough. And I start to thinking again about what you're saying now is there's always that person of higher status that you're looking towards, especially if they're in your peer group.
Yeah,
or they've got stuff that highlights, because with men, our car or our property or our clothes, they highlight our status usually.
Yeah.
And so I realised I don't think there will ever be enough for him. So he's constantly going to be pursuing more status.
Yeah.
To the point he really gets to 70, 80 years old, and they always say, "Oh, on your deathbed, you always wish you'd never worked so much. You realise that it kind of didn't matter. So
Yeah, but you see, that's
or do we need
that's what
it
you
forever?
think, like, it didn't matter, but
But it did.
it did. Like I'm very dubious about that idea about the deathbed, the deathbed regrets. Oh, I wish I'd had more time for my family. But but you didn't, though, did you? Because you were loving the status game. You were obsessed with that game you were playing to do the next thing and then do the next thing and do the next thing, and it gave your life meaning. It gave your life purpose. And for these super successful individuals, they're also creating meaning and purpose for lots of other people too.
Sure.
Like, so they're mad, these people, but they're incredibly valuable. And we envy them, and they're not popular often because we're jealous of them. But they're the ones that build the future. So I'm sure on their deathbed they go, oh, I wish. But I'm dubious about just because they're on their deathbed, it's not like a moment of peak wisdom. If they wanted to do that, they would have done that, but they just weren't built that way.
Yeah, true.
And I think it is partly this cultural thing that we just look down on the idea of pursuit of status, even though it's pursuit of status that pushes civilization forwards.
I think that's a very British check and balance. I know in the US, even if they don't mean it, they celebrate status a lot more, success more.
Yeah, they're much more
Whereas here
individualistic.
we kind of cut each other down. But is someone pursuing status in a career, I will have had to sacrifice status with my own children.
Yeah,
I've definitely. Apologies. I still think he loves me, but there are times where I know my kids have been. Why are you still working here? You're always in front of your computer. You're always on your phone on Twitter. You're always doing something. I'm always chasing status rather than protecting my status with my children. So that puts me there's not a single status.
No, you're playing multiple status games, absolutely, and I'm sure that if your children are looking at you as if you're low status, they don't respect you, that's incredibly painful, and you're certainly going to feel that in the moment. Like Elon Musk has that. He's one of the most high status people in the world, but he has a bad relationship with many of his children, and that must be a source of pain for him. So we're always playing multiple status games, and something you said earlier on is absolutely right. Is we play them with our peers too. That's the other thing. So you might look at someone like Taylor Swift or Elon Musk and think, well, they're fine. They've got so much status, but they're not playing status games with us.
No,
Taylor Swift is playing status games with Charlie XCX, who's now going to beat her at all the music prizes this year by the looks of things, and that's not going to be. And she's going to be annoyed at that. Elon Musk is playing status games versus Bezos and Zuckerberg and I don't know, all these other people, and so it's. The higher you get, it doesn't get any easier. It just means that your competition is tougher. So it gets more and more kind of stressful.
At Ledden, we built the best Bitcoin-backed loan platform in the world. Proven, trusted, growing. Ledden's proven track record speaks for itself. Visit ledden.io/Mr. Obnoxious to get started. Ledden, there is no second best. Ledden is not regulated in the United Kingdom. Any credit products or virtual asset services provided by Ledden are not subject to UK regulatory protections. Please consider the risks associated with virtual assets and consult a financial advisor before making any decisions.
Yes, and so when we're, it's like you see like a Premier League footballer complain, they're like, what are you complaining? You're on 200 grand a week.
Exactly.
But for them, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter because it's all relative.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely right. It's all relative. The other thing as you were talking about was the thing about these super rich people, which made me laugh when I was reading the book, was that someone did a psychologist did a study where they got loads of like 10 times millionaires and billionaires, and they asked them all how much more money would you need to be perfectly happy. Consistently they said 3 times as much money as I've got now. No matter how much they had, they all thought it was 3 times as much money, which is just hilarious because just the idea that they really believed that they were going to be perfectly happy like ever, it's just pure fantasy. But also the fact that they all said about 3 times as much, no matter how much they had, it was that then I'd be perfectly happy.
I wonder if there's like a status equilibrium you can get into, like a status flow state. In that, because I can imagine too much status brings anxiety of losing that status, and too little status, that anxiety if you have no meaning. Can you hit that kind of flow state? It's like, I'm about right.
Well, I think for me that would be your life having a gradual rise in status throughout your life. That's the perfect.
Is that it?
Yeah, I think so. And again, just to kind of highlight, when we're talking about status, we're not talking about being the best. It's about being respected and valued. So if you're an ordinary person and you don't have a massively high need for status, you're going to be perfectly happy sort of going into school, being a teacher, and the teachers respect you and the kids respect you, and that's a good day, and that's healthy, that's good. If you're wired a bit differently, maybe you want to, I don't know, be a musician or a sports star or a podcaster, but it's that for me the healthiest manifestation of status pursuit is this gradual climb as you get older. So no sudden jumps. I think that they're really, because then you might get sudden falls, and I think it affects your personality. Having those sudden jumps, it can make you a bit of an arsehole if you're not careful. So that gradual climb, I think, is the healthiest, nicest, most pleasant way of doing it.
And so I guess then, if you think, because there's certain people with very high status and they've still got they still want to spend time with their friends they grew up with. And so you almost want that status leveler to keep your feet on the ground.
Yeah.
I mean, I've never been super famous. I don't know what it's like, but I can certainly imagine a scenario where your feet lift off the ground, you start to believe your own hype and shit. You get a bit diva-like, a little bit, you expect too much. You're having your friends around you just to keep your status in check was probably a useful...
It is, if they can cope with it. I don't have any super famous friends, but I can imagine if you've got a school friend who suddenly became Benedict Cumberbatch, like it would be quite difficult actually to be around that person.
But that gives you status as well.
Well, it would, but nobody wants to think of themselves as a hanger-on, as part of the entourage. So so I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Like and it would depend. If you were the famous person, you'd have to be very good at just being normal in the presence of your friends and not talking endlessly about this Spielberg movie that you're just not sure whether you're going to do it or not because it's only 20 mil or whatever it is. You've got to keep all that out of the conversation, I would imagine, in order to and accept a bit of banter and a bit of pushback from your friends if you do that.
Did anyone else really study status in the way you had before you? Like, were you aware of it? And the reason I'll give you the question I'm leading towards is that has this understanding of status been used and shifted the way psychologists treat people?
I don't think so. I mean, one of the things that sort of staggered me was when I was sort of in the run-up to writing this book was like, why hasn't this book already been written? Because there's so many books written about connection and loneliness, and it just, everybody's interested in this. And I think they're interested in that because it tells a nice story about people. We're loving and we want connection and belonging and we don't want to be lonely. It's a nice story to tell about humans. Whereas status... it's quite a dark book, The Status Game too. There's lots of murder and genocide in it. So it does touch on touches on sort of darker themes, and I think people just don't want to I don't want to think about it that much. So it was surprising to me that the book hadn't already been written because it's sort of there in plain sight. The only big book that I was aware of before writing it was Status Anxiety by Alain de Botton, that was published about 20 years ago. It was a huge international bestseller. It's done a lot better than my book has done. And I love Alain de Botton. I'm a huge fan of his. But his kind of conception of what status is, I thought was batshit, really. Okay. He kind of argues in the book that, if I'm remembering it rightly, it was actually the first book I read, and he was arguing that he seemed to think that status was a product of the kind of post-industrial age, and that we started caring about status and we started to get money and social mobility became a possibility, and his answer to rid ourselves of status anxiety was to act like the Bohemians did, the artists who didn't care about status. And I was like, have you ever met a writer? Like these authors in his garage. It's like writers are obsessed with bloody status. So this idea that status is only about money and only about keeping up with the Joneses in that very materialistic, shallow sense, I just think it's wrong. I mean, to be fair to Alain de Botton, he's a philosopher. He's not a psychologist, so the book doesn't really have any psychology in it. But yeah, I just felt that was just it was a weird idea of what status is that was sort of quite shallow.
Yeah, because I think back through my life, and I think of moments having read your book prior to those moments, how I maybe would have dealt with them differently or think about them differently. Relationship breakups. Career. I was a super extrovert when I was younger. I've gradually just matured out of that.
Wow.
Not completely. I'm still a bit of a dick, but like times when I'm being a dick, because sometimes you're being a dick, and you can reflect on that. And it feels like this would be a very useful tool to arm people with this understanding of status and how it affects you and the most important parts of your life.
Yeah, I think so, and it is such a powerful force in us, as human beings, and so understanding that force, like that's why they have a school shooting problem in America. 87% of school shooters are bullied. That's not a coincidence. They're chronically lacking in status, and so to restore their sense of status, the only way they can think of now is to bring a gun to school and blow the shit out of the people that they feel like are higher status than them. It's really important that we understand this stuff, because we don't get it at the moment. We don't understand it. We never talk about status as this important thing. People worry so much about incel culture and the misogyny that breeds. Well, that's also about status. That's lots of young guys who are unattractive and struggle with being social, who perfectly naturally and acceptably crave female company.
They want connection.
They want connection. Then they want to have sex. There's nothing wrong with wanting to have sex.
Yeah.
And they can't. They're rejected again and again and again, and they get angry. And then in that anger, they tell a nasty, toxic story, which is where the misogyny manifests. But underneath that nasty, toxic story, which is all that people see, is pain. It's real pain rooted in a chronic lack of status. But because we don't understand status, all we see is this toxic story. And incels are worse than. I mean, they're basically the lowest of the low in terms of status in our culture. But it's driven by the perfectly healthy and acceptable need for status.
Going back to those darker moments, the school shootings, or any kind of mass shooting, we are aware some people do it for a notoriety. It's it's a weird thing, actually, in some ways, because some of them will end by killing themselves.
Yeah,
and they're seeking a status they won't see. They're leaving a status.
But that to me is just evidence that status is so incredibly important to us. So I said earlier on that we live in these two realms at once. There's the survival realm, and there's the story realm, where connection and status are what's important. Humans again and again and again choose story over survival. We would rather die than suffer a chronic lack of status. And it's not just in school shootings, it's in terrorist incidents. Those people who flew the plane into the World Trade Center, the people who wear suicide bomber vests, even the people who go to war, who've got a very high chance of dying, they're choosing reputation, they're choosing status over their lives. I mean, in my next book, I wrote about smoking, about smoke, how the craziness of fucking smoking. I used to smoke. So when with full knowledge it was addictive, that it was going to make me stink. Yeah, there you go.
No, it doesn't stink anymore.
That's
it smells of strawberries.
Oh, lovely. Yeah, but I was smoking rollies, back in the 90s. It was going to make me. It was probably going to kill me. All that stuff, but you do it anyway because it makes you look a little bit cool.
Well,
bit cool.
It starts as status,
yeah,
and it starts as connection, actually, because
yeah.
everyone else is smoking.
Yeah. I quoted a study that was done years ago about the anthropology of British pubs, and somebody wrote this thing about how smoking delineates the group in the pub. So when you're handing out cigarettes, it marks who's in the in group. I thought it was a really interesting way of thinking about smoking. But so you're not going to get any other animal doing something stupid as smoking. But that's what we did. And smoking only smoking actual cigarettes, not vapes, only started. Entered its kind of death spiral as a habit when it became. Uncool when it was initially
flipped the status.
Yeah, they flipped the status, and so they spent years trying to stop people smoking by saying it's going to kill you. It didn't work, but what does work? I mean, my own story, like when I used to smoke and roll ups, and I tried to quit, but I couldn't quit. But what finally made me quit was I was working at a men's magazine, and I turned up to interview this. I think it was an actress or a model, some very highly attractive young woman. And so how it works in those situations is you've got this. You're in a photo studio, and then they've got these kind of fake walls where they've got a little room where they're kind of dressing and doing their hair and makeup. So I knocked on the thing and went in to introduce myself, and she was having her hair and makeup done. And then I went and sat down outside the fake polystyrene wall, and I heard the stylist say to the model, "Ugh, did you see his yellow fingers? How disgusting!" And I was like, "Oh my god!" And it was that. That was what made me quit. It wasn't the fact that I was coughing up brown jelly into the sink. That didn't do it.
No.
But hearing two attractive young women calling me disgusting, that was what made me give up smoking.
So I used to smoke. I always felt the shame of the smell. I sensed it on myself. Obviously, the vapes got rid of that, so I'm back in addicted to nicotine like a crazy person. But actually, that pursuit of death status is kind of weird in that, we pursue status because we experience status.
Yeah.
But if you pursue a status through death, you don't actually get to experience the status itself because you're dead.
Yeah.
It's like when people talk about leaving a legacy. I often think about that. It's like, well, why do I fucking care? I'm not here.
But that's the ramification of being a storytelling animal. The story is so important to us, and the story that after I die, I'm going to be celebrated as this person who, really took it to the American infidel, or died on the beaches trying to fight Nazism or whatever it is. It really matters to people, like that. The story of who we are, our reputation, the sense that we're a hero to our group. It matters to people more than their actual lives matter. Back in the day, the Christian martyrs refusing to renounce their death, even as they were being burned alive at the stake. I mean, that's the story world. That's how important our status is to us. Even as the flames are licking our toes, we're still refusing to say, I don't, I renounce my faith.
So go into those darker places. Does status explain why humans are capable of some of the most horrific things?
Yeah. Will they cross their own red lines of morality to maintain status? Is that really what's happening? Yeah. So if one of the most sort of dangerous stories that's told is our group has been unfairly deprived of status, and it's this group over here that have done that. And what we must do now is destroy that group. So that's the story that the communists told about the bourgeoisie. That's the story that the Nazis told about the Jews. And what's especially interesting in the case of the Nazis is that, of course, the Nazis didn't just attack Jews. They also attacked homosexuals and communists and gypsies, travellers. But it was only the Jews that they humiliated. So, the Jews were the high status group, and it was the Jews that they, shaved their hair off and taunted them in the street, and they sought to humiliate them. And it was and the Holocaust itself only really kicked off after Germany started losing the Second World War. So they suddenly this drop in status. So humiliation is really important, because humiliation is the sudden and dramatic withdrawal of status. Humiliation is status stuff. When you're humiliating somebody, that's a status sort of battle that's going on. So that's why I argue in the book that you can't really understand Nazism and the Holocaust without understanding status. And of course, the backstory to all that is the Treaty of Versailles, where after the First World War, the Axis, the France and the victorious powers didn't just declare their victory. They humiliated Germany. They took it to being by far the most successful country in continental Europe, and crushed them and humiliated them and took their land, took their money, and so that's humiliation on the individual level. And then Hitler comes along and says, "Fuck these people, fuck the Versailles Treaty. I'm going to restore Germany's status in the world." And the reason that people treated him like a god is because he actually did do that. He brought in an amazingly short period of time, he restored Germany's economy. He just trampled all over the Versailles Treaty. They brought in all these technological things like the Autobahn system, which they're very famous for. They were the first country in the world to understand the link between smoking and cancer, and they were incredibly technologically advanced. And that's the story that people are kind of scared to tell about Hitler and the Nazis, is that before the war, he was incredibly successful. He did what he said he was going to do, and that's why they worshipped him so much, because he took their destroyed status, their humiliation, and completely transformed it in a matter of years. And that's why he was treated as a god. And that's the power of status. And then the other thing that surprised me when I was doing the research was that when you see those speeches that Hitler does in German, you imagine that he's going on about the Jews, he's obsessed with the Jews, but he wasn't in the run up to the war, because it wasn't playing well with the middle classes. Everybody was pretty anti-Semitic in Germany, as they were all over Europe, but they weren't up for the violence against the Jews. That was, so really, all the propaganda of Hitler was really all about persuading the Germans that they didn't want to go into war again, because none of the Germans wanted a Second World War. So he was trying to persuade them that he didn't want that was Nazi propaganda. Was all about we don't want another war. It's those that are pushing us into it. So yeah, it's all the whole, you can't understand the Second World War and the Holocaust without understanding the incredible importance of status to people.
And there's some. It feels like there's some parallels there with Donald Trump right now. I'm not saying we're about to go into a period of fascism like some people think we are, but actually Donald Trump is trying to restore the status of America, which many, not everyone, but many believe has slipped over the last decade or two.
Absolutely.
And so again, then I guess nationalism itself is a status game.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so it will never not be an incredibly seductive story, which is, I'm going to restore our status. I'm going to improve our status. And that's what, like, you can take it to Britain as well. Look at Tony Blair versus Keir Starmer. I mean, Tony Blair was amazing. New Britain. This is a new dawn for Britain. It's positivity, it's optimism. He didn't spend all this time shitting on the Tories. He spent most of his time saying an amazing future, new Labour, new Britain. It was like the mantra, in the years before his election, and people loved it, landslide. And now look at the difference with Keir Starmer, who spent his first 100 days just doom and gloom and obsessing about the Tories and what they've done to us. It's a disaster.
22 billion black hole.
Oh God! Like, but nobody wants to bloody hear it, and it's just this sort of basic understanding of the importance of storytelling and what makes a persuasive story is just completely missing from the Keir Starmer government. I mean, just look, as I said, look across the pond at what Trump's doing. He's just saying he's going to make America great again over and over again, and we're going to restore America. America first. I mean, that's the story that will always be seductive to people. That I'm going to increase our status,
and so you see the people emulating stories then. So you can look at Farage and Reform, and people say there's some parallels with Donald Trump, but certainly they're trying to tell a similar story. In that here is, it's not exactly the same. It's like, it's a similar story. So you start to emulate stories to establish your own status.
I mean, you also see a parallel with the Brexit campaign, and we're going to take back control. That was an optimistic, positive story. It was an anti-immigration argument, but it was spun to be into a positive version of that. We're going to take back control. It's going to be amazing. And the problem with for the Remain campaign was they didn't really have a persuasive, positive story to tell, because their story was remaining. It was, we're just going to keep everything the same as it always has been, and that's always going to be a problem for them campaigning, because where's the glorious future that you're promising? And they couldn't really promise one. All they could do was do the Keir Starmer thing and just say, look, if we leave Europe, it's going to be disastrous economically. I mean, and unfortunately, as far as I'm concerned, that was the truth. They were right. But in terms of storytelling, they had a really difficult task on their hands, the Remain campaign.
Yeah, and so that now I think of, we're jumping around here, I think of Vladimir Putin. I think, well, the starting of the war can be considered a status game, establishing power, maintaining power. But actually, the biggest challenge here is ending a war. I mean, if you were objective and rational, you say, look, this isn't working. Loads of people are dying. Nobody's winning. Let's just go our separate ways. We'll go back to Russia. You have Ukraine. But really, for Vladimir Putin to walk away and not have won that war, it's a real kind of dagger in his status.
Absolutely right, and that's why it's going to be so hard to end, because even if it is draining Russia of all their money and is and costing them huge amounts in terms of the blood of their young men, there's got to be a way that he can walk away from that, telling a story that there's been an increase in status. That's the difficulty there, and it will always be the difficulty with ending wars, and that's why people are, I think wiser people are arguing that if it did have to end, it's important not to humiliate Russia.
Yes,
because it might be satisfying in the short term, but in the long term, there's going to be pushback. There's going to be blowback. If you humiliate people, it's never the end of the story, because they're always going to come back at you.
It's blown my mind, Will. I think I'm at the end of my questions on this.
Great.
I didn't realize we'll talk about status so much, but it's honestly, it's really blown my mind. There's so much to think about here. I feel like certainly for the next few days, everything I'm watching, I'm going to be watching it through the lens of status. Did you say you're starting work on a new book?
I've got a new book coming out February the 20th.
Okay.
Called A Story is a Deal, and it's about how to how we can use storytelling to make persuasive appeals for leadership, persuasion, motivation. So all that stuff about telling positive stories, smoking, that's all from A Story is a Deal. So.
Interesting. We need that at the moment, don't we? I own a football club.
Oh,
in where I live in Bedford.
Wow.
Non-league football club.
Okay.
So we're 8th tier, and we've made an offer to merge with the other local team at the 7th tier. And there's lots of questions about the name and what the brand will be and how we navigate that. But really, it's just a story that needs to be told that brings everybody on board.
Yeah, absolutely is. Yeah.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. Will, look, I'm really glad to do this. It was an absolute pleasure. I wanted to do it for a long time. I was really pleased when Danny mentioned you got in touch. I was just like, oh, it's a different show now. But amazing stuff. If people want to read your books, follow what you do, where do they go?
So Twitter is Will at WStorr, WSTORR, or just you can my website is willstorr.com.
Amazing, man. Well, listen, good luck and thank you for coming in.
No, thanks for having me, Peter. It's been a great chat. Thank you.
Thanks for listening, everyone.